Hello, everyone. This is John Zorn, Executive Director of ArtsReach, and welcome to our webinar today. We have two special guests with us this morning. Of course, our presenter, Donna Walker-Kuhn. And to introduce Donna this morning, we have a very special guest, Bahia Ramos, who's the Director of Arts at the Wallace Foundation, and they've been a tremendous supporter of ArtsReach and, of course, arts organizations across North America. So Bahia, we're delighted to have you with us, and please take it away.
Thanks, John. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm over on the East Coast, so pardon my timing, but I'm Bahia Ramos, Director of Arts at the Wallace Foundation, and I'm delighted to introduce Donna Walker-Kuhn, who will speak today on equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. State of the art, where are we now? But first, I want to acknowledge the havoc wrought by COVID-19 throughout the US and the world. State and local governments are predicting shortfalls in tax revenue that will affect their ability to deliver services. Many businesses have ground to a halt, and of course, arts organizations have had to suspend their lifeblood, the communal experience of a performance and visual arts, with a severe loss of earned and contributed income. We also face great certainty about when people will feel comfortable returning to group settings. And I do want to note that Wallace has joined with other funders to support a series of surveys over time to gain insights about audience willingness to return to the concert hall and museum. Those findings will be public so all of you can use them. So this may seem like an odd time to be discussing equity and accessibility, but I think the opposite is true. This crisis has given us time to think about the future, to think about a future for the arts that could be more diverse and inclusive than we have ever seen before, and to think about how artistic excellence, engagement with the community, and financial sustainability might be intertwined. Throughout her career, Donna has helped us imagine such a future. Her 2005 book, Invitation to the Party, which the GIA reader called a must-read, recommends 10 practices to consider in building a more diverse audience. Many of them dovetail with the Wallace Foundation's own research on strategies used by arts organizations that have successfully expanded audiences. Those include using research to understand barriers to participation, often perceptual, that audiences face, the idea that building audiences is not the responsibility of one department, but the whole organization, providing multiple paths into the artistic experience, and the focus on relationships between an organization, its patrons, and its community. One of Donna's most powerful metaphors is the idea of a bridge, replacing the phrase, if you build it, they will come, with, if you build bridges, they will come. Donna's been honored with more than 50 awards, including the Community Service Award from Women in Media, the Women of Excellence Award from the National Action Network, the New York University Award for Teaching Excellence, and she was named one of the 25 most influential Black women by the Network Journal. A former dancer herself, her vision springs from her conviction that at a time of great division, the arts is the only pure vehicle we have in today's society that crosses cultural and ethnic boundaries and allows people to transcend their differences. This reminder is evident as we see the ways arts has become a source of connection and existence of our collective humanity through this time of quarantining and social distancing. As we adapt and find ways to emerge from the other side of this pandemic, I'm hopeful that the arts will be an important part of that restoration. And now let me turn it over to Donna.
Thank you. See.
All right, Donna.
Yes.
Go ahead and click show your screen.
I did.
Now.
Then do you see it?
No, not seeing it yet. Oh, yes. Yes, we are seeing it now. Okay, go ahead. Very good. It's looking great. So Donna, before you get started, I just want to tell people we're going to be taking questions at the end of Donna's presentation here. So if you have questions, just type them into the question box and send them on in whenever you want to, and then we will take care of them at the end of Donna's presentation. So Donna, go right ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Bahia, for that beautiful introduction, and thank you, Wallace Foundation, for your tremendous and ongoing support Thank you, John Zorn, for always creating these opportunities for us to share our knowledge and training in this field. And so today, these are some of the things I would like to talk about to all of our listeners. And I thank all of you for taking time out of your schedule today so that we can see how we can advance this field of EDIA. I also would like to express my sincere condolences for any of us on the call who have had, deep negative impacts from COVID-19. I think it's important to acknowledge that as well. And so today, in our brief time together, I am going to try to talk about these various points. I'm going to just do brief definitions on what EDIA is, in my opinion, share some of the voices from the field, talk about arts organizations' leadership, progress, our values, building the culture, where do we want to go, opportunities, recommendations, and the future. Okay, so where are we now? We're in process. We've defined the need. It's articulated in a variety of ways within our arts sector. Many arts organizations have issued statements that are on their websites and have been board approved. And there's even been funding allocated specifically for this purpose. But it's the implementation and sustainability that we're still on the cusp, that's still in our embryonic status to assess the long-term impact. So as I see it, there are three key areas where EDIA are most needed, and that is pipeline leadership, building audiences, and our programming. So definitions, just briefly, and as you all know, there are a million different definitions. I would encourage each organization to create your own because it should be relevant to the work that you do. But these are some of the general ones that I kind of play with. Diversity, representation of all varied identities and differences, which includes race, ethnicity, gender, disabilities, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, tribe, caste, socioeconomic status, political, ageism, religion. These are some of the factors that make up what it could be a diverse constituency. And, believing that the solution to these problems we hope to address can be found in affirming our similarities, as well as finding value in our differences. Equity. So that equity seeks to ensure fair treatment, equality of opportunity, and fairness and access to information and resources for all. Inclusion builds a culture of built belonging by actively inviting the contribution and participation of all people so that every person's voice adds value, and we strive to create balance in the face of power differences. Accessibility, supporting our environment to provide individuals with disabilities an opportunity to participate in our events, as well as making the environment more accessible to people who have different ways of entering an arts experience. So in the field, there's some key voices that I think that are inform how we define and talk about EDIA. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Sandra Jackson Dumont, formerly at the Met Museum, now director of the Lucas Museum. But in an interview she and I had a year or so ago, she said, there's no end date for diversity, bias awareness, and inclusion work. So if an organization is to ensure equitable access and opportunities for everyone, the work should be a part of the DNA of the entire organization. And I so applaud that statement because, we don't finish. There's no finish line to this because human beings continue to evolve and to enter into organizations, bringing with them their history. She continues to say, my dream is that every program has diversity and inclusion embedded within it. The responsibility belongs to everyone, not just the person with the job title, but it's the president, executive director, or chief, assuming responsibility for this important work at all levels, from programming and partnerships to the staff and board. The executive officer is the real chief diversity officer. And then another colleague of mine, Dr. Indira Etwaro, who's head of the Billie Holiday Theater in Brooklyn, she talks about brave spaces. And I love that idea because it's so inclusive. It's about engaging diverse communities to deal with empowering, and staff so that the culture is one where people feel they can speak freely without fear of repercussions, creating brave spaces to create change, imagining beyond the physical and imagined boundary, but actually your own circumstances and how that can inform where you work and what you say. And she refers to the civil rights movement and global community acts of revolution, which have been instrumental in building brave spaces. And I'm sure we're all familiar with Darren Walker and his incredible innovation and ideas towards philanthropy, but also towards EDIA. And Darren says, I think diversity for me is about excellence. We could stop right there. I just think that is so fantastic because he addresses the idea that diversity somehow dilutes the impact and power, and it, of course, does not. He says, I think, regrettably, diversity was framed by some and continues to be framed in a way that suggests that diversity correlates with a loss of quality. And actually, what the research shows, the empirical evidence, is that diversity makes organizations better. The more diverse organizations by empirical indicators are, the more excellent they are at whatever their mission, whether it's IBM, Ford Foundation, or a ballet company. So I actually don't talk about diversity without talking about excellence. Diversity is a contributor to excellence. Thank you, Darren, for that wonderful statement. So, how many arts organizations can even talk about diversity? And I think in order to really look at that, we have to first think about getting over our fear of talking about diversity. There's a writer that I admire. There are many writers and thinkers that I admire, so I will be sprinkling their voices throughout my presentation. One of them is Daisy Auger Dominguez, and she says in an article titled Getting Over Your Fear of Talking About Diversity, she says, the good news is that a majority of top leaders already understand how critical these efforts are. And she's experienced this in her work at Google and Disney and other large firms. But she says she finds one thing plaguing their attempts, and that is fear. The leaders are so terrified about messing things up or saying the wrong thing to their stakeholders that they're paralyzed into inaction. And so that we know we have to move through by leaning into the language and to how we feel. So what are arts organizations' goals for EDIA? I think certainly diversity in staff, audiences, programs, equity in leadership, and to provide whatever is necessary for diverse voices to have the same access and opportunity as their white colleagues. Inclusion, which will provide a mechanism to ensure diverse voices are at the table. Programs that include the community you serve, and board membership that reflect the demographics where you serve. I think these are some shared goals that we would probably agree with. So the question is, can the arts lead the way for EDIA? And, there's another wonderful writer that kind of looks at this in an interesting way, Pamela Newkirk. And she's written a book called Diversity, Inc., The Failed Promise of a $1 billion Industry. One of her points is that, we've spent a lot of money on this, but is it really translating into concrete change? And then what would you say? Is that being translated into your arts sector, your arts organization? So in her book, she gives some very interesting statistics, where she talks about the power and the economic power of people of makeup. Make up nearly 40% of the U.S. population, yet remain acutely underrepresented in most influential fields. She talks about Black law partners, the proportionate of men of color in management at U.S. companies. She says people of color held about 16% of Fortune 500 board seats in 2018. This survey of 15 largest public fashion and apparel companies found that non-whites held only 11% of board seats. And even in the top 200 films released 3 years ago, people of color accounted for, 8% of writers, 13% of directors, 20% of lead roles. So with all this money, effort, dialogue, where do we really see the movement? So one thing that I've been inspired and impressed by is seeing the progress and leadership within the arts community. In 2019, 47 women and men were appointed in first ever responsibilities in the world of visual arts and culture. We saw a significant rise in Black curators and arts leadership appointments beginning with Lonnie Bunch III, who was the founding director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, was appointed secretary of the Smithsonian Institution in DC, which is the largest museum, education, and research complex in the world. And then we saw some curators like Denise Murrell, which is hired by the Met Museum at the Guggenheim. Ashley James was the first Black curator on staff. And so we see that certainly there was movement, particularly in 2019. And even beyond museums, we see that there's movement in sectors in auction houses and art fairs, as well as in theaters and in educational sectors. And so that is something that I think is very inspiring. Of course, we know there's much work to do, but since we're looking at the status of things, we want to just examine where there is success and progress. And so we think about, same slide, we go forward. So looking at the numbers, in Pamela Newkirk's book, and she talks about people of color. Okay, we looked at that too. My slides are acting crazy. So, and in response, one interesting point that has come up that Pamela talks about, that while there's this discussion on EDIA, sometimes many whites are now claiming disenfranchisement. And she looks at an NPR poll from 2017 stating that 55% of surveyed white Americans believe they're being discriminated against, although they can't really tell you why or where. And she asked this important question, that how do we get to this point where diversity has become such a catch-all that we've lost the focus of the original intention and goals of diversity and affirmative action programs, equal rights, a level playing field, and anti-discriminatory efforts. So that's something we have to be extremely mindful of, and this sensitivity, that we have to continue to walk with, live with, and breathe with. So what are the values of EDIA? Because if this is a value-based initiative effort, and it has to live somewhere. And, one of the points that Ms. Newkirk makes is that change will require resources and resolve, but no amount of money will succeed alongside a willful negation of our shared humanity. So it requires values. And so this is another reference point that I think is important. Equity in the Center released this Awake to Woke to Work, building a race equity culture. And one of the points, that they talk about is, what is the movement from I'm awake to I'm woke to actually implementing the work. And they state organizations move from the awake stage where people-focused workplace reforms are enacted to culture transformation and inclusive practices in the woke stage, and then building up to the work stage where the systematic and integrative race equity lens examines all of the organization's internal and external work. And you want to think about where are you in this journey, because we're someplace within this. But I do believe when we look at, just the status of movement and has this investment thus far created value, I would say yes. I believe the impact of EDIA will be significant and life-changing the more that we continue to move down this path. But it's not until we can really look at ourselves deeply and honestly and painfully can we really begin to build a respectful relationship of diversity. And so again, we're at the beginning, I believe. I don't think we've been doing this long enough to really see long-term impact, but that's what we do in the arts. We continue to evolve, and that I'm excited about. And so where do we want to land with all of this? At the end of the day, what is our goal? And I think it's, to have an EDIA culture where we're proud of internally and externally. So what do we look like and how do we talk amongst our staff and colleagues? And then what is that to the community? Because it's got to be authentic, as my students tell me constantly. It has to be authenticity, and there has to be integrity. I think understanding actualization that EDIA work never stops. There is no there. We're not going to be able to sit back and say, whoop, did that, check. No, because we're human beings and we all bring our history to our work and to our beliefs. And fundamentally, we're talking about changing the core of how people believe, of their thinking of people who are different from them and may not have understood their journey. And so we've made these value judgments about that. And that's what informs how successful we can be with our EDIA work. And also to implement ongoing EDIA initiatives that include our staff, our vendors that we work with, and our board of directors. And so I'm sure some of you are familiar with the book White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, and I have found this definitely a significant resource in educating the white community and staff, board about their role in perpetuating this need to even talk about EDIA. But before we actually really talk about that, there's one more opportunity I want to share before we talk about the white fragility, and that is the philanthropic opportunity that exists with us when we do this EDIA work thoroughly. I believe that fundraising is a key sector that is often overlooked, as in many instances, we know that there's few development officers of color. But it's a missed opportunity to cultivate donors of color. And it's a missed opportunity not even having senior development level staff for donor cultivation. So I think this is a moment for us to really pause and think about. So when we look at philanthropy in communities of color, it's robust. People of color are always giving. We've been philanthropic since the beginning of time. But it's a cultural difference, different cultural nuances, and understanding what that is so that we can look at that as also a source of unearned revenue, which in real terms is very important. But, I think of people like Reginald Van Lee, who is an incredible philanthropist and has given generously to the arts for many years. And, in an interview I had with him, he said that, his arts organizations, education, youth-based projects, all of these things are connected. And he said most people have some type of resource they can contribute to the health and sustainability of an organization. Everybody can give something. And he said all those little somethings add up to a big something. And that's where I think is also opportunity for movement. There's also an article titled Diversity Matters, Theoretical Understanding of and Suggestions of the Current Fundraising Practices of Nonprofit Arts Museum. And it talks about, the traditional funding base of mostly white patrons negates the change in the nation's demographics, migration, and immigration patterns. That 1/3 of the American population is composed of people of color, and demographers project that by 2060, that population will double. So why not look at this as also potential for EDIA? Also, there's an argument that's made that these multicultural communities have not been actively cultivated to participate in mainstream philanthropy. But it's not because the communities lack the interest in the institutions or the financial resources, but they've been ignored by mainstream nonprofits and other fundraising professionals. So this is an opportunity, and we don't want to miss it. And so back to Madam Robin DiAngelo and her book, White Fragility. And she talks about this whole concept of this. She says white fragility is intended to describe a very specific white phenomenon. And it's much more than mere defensiveness or whining, but it may be conceptualized as a sociology of dominance, an outcome of white people's socialization into white supremacy, and a means to protect, maintain, and reproduce white supremacy. So you're probably thinking to yourself, well, what does that have to do with EDIA? It has everything to do with it, everything. And so going forward, Robin offered some really important tips of advice, points of advice. She says, do not depend on people of color for your racial education. You can get it yourself through these books, websites, films. And the true issue is the lack of interest or motivation that has prevented you from receiving it. She says also get involved in multiracial organizations and white organizations that are working for racial justice. And then interrupt white fragility. We do this by building the capacity to sustain cross-racial honesty. Back to Dr. Indira Etwalo's point about brave spaces, by being willing to tolerate the discomfort associated with an honest appraisal and discussion of internalized superiority and racial privilege. So this is where we lean in. And this is what everyone is required to do. There's not someone that's exempt. We all do this, from different perspectives. And so this will then also allow us to interrupt racism, which is at the root of why we even have to talk about EDIA, equity, diversity, inclusion. Why is this even in a discussion? And so interrupting racism takes courage and intentionality. And the intention is by definition, not passive or complacent. And so this is where we all put on our warrior cloak and make a determination that I am going to transform this field based on my life, based on my efforts and my intention. And you can do it wherever you are, whether you're the receptionist, whether you're delivering the set, whatever role that we play in the world of the arts making. Each of us can play a part in this, and not considering ourselves finished ever with our learning. So recommendations, what do we think about this, moving forward? And I would say that, no one culture is intrinsically superior to another. We all know that, but do we believe that, and do we exhibit that in our behavior? The responsibility for creating a culture of diversity belongs to everyone. The arts traditionally seeks to deconstruct barriers and celebrate the breadth and depth of humanity. So by definition, this is what the arts do. What we're talking about is embedding this as part of the culture of arts making, arts execution, so that we see the equity and the inclusion on all levels. And as I said in the beginning, I do believe that there are arts organizations that are moving down this path, in a very thoughtful way. And what will allow us to see more success is for more of us to be involved in this work, for us to have solid measurements of success, metrics that we can all agree on, accountability, and we'll get to that checklist in a little bit. But those are the things that I think are really important. I have just completed my second book, which is called Champions of the Arts, Lessons and Successful Strategies for Engaging Diverse Audiences. And in this book, I really talk about the importance of EDIA, but also who's doing the work that is on, again, embryonic stages, but still a consciousness that, this is the role that we have to play, that this need for understanding and appreciating the interdependence of humanity, cultures is so important, as well as building alliances across differences so we can work together to eradicate all forms of discrimination, not just race and ethnicity, but everything, all of that. And can you imagine how this could be? Even the journey of this, the process of this, is like an awakening, that will be reflected in the art, and something that artists I know will be extremely excited about. And as Faiz mentioned at the beginning, we can't really talk about this without looking at the world of post-COVID-19. And so again, I think about, wow, what will be the difference now? We're talking about a society, a world, we're not quite sure what that's going to look like, but I know and I believe that there's more opportunity now than ever, again, for us to really look at what people are we engaging, how are we engaging them, being more sensitive, more thoughtful, more intentional. Now is the time to really think about that closely. I encourage everyone to think, how can my organization move this needle? Because that is how, certainly that is a path that I think people will feel comfortable coming in, knowing that they're being acknowledged, being recognized, that there are opportunities designed for them that reflect their cultural interests and behavior. And so, yes, we may have to pivot a bit, but that's what we do in the arts as well. And so that's not a new thought. So I've been doing some thinking. At what age should we begin this EDIA education? I work a lot, of course, with adults, and I love them, every last one, but it's hard. It's hard to change your fundamental beliefs. It's hard to even acknowledge that this is true. It's like, I'm not like that. I have many people say, I'm not racist. I'm like, okay, the mere fact that you said that means that there's something there we have to dig deeper into. And so it's really difficult. And I think that teaching this is within, existing arts organizations. This whole idea this is a foundation in which we can start. But as you know, socialization begins long before we start to go to school. And so why not think about how we can build this more deeply into the educational experience of children? And so I think to have a lasting impact, it's imperative that we begin with this acknowledgement that the roots are deep in the history of slavery and appropriation of Native American land. So there's an honesty that we just have to really talk about. And so with this, we talk about this beginning the EDIA education in an earlier perspective. I just want to share some thoughts I have on that. That generally the consensus for consulting about or teaching EDIA has been to develop and implement methods within existing businesses, institutions, arts organizations, and to repair unconscious bias and engage in activities such as lectures and dialogues that facilitate respect for diversity. But I'm also thinking that, in the behavior, when these truths and values conflict with the upbringing, it becomes very difficult to change that belief. And so that's why I'm starting to think we need to make a concerted effort to begin to teach and implement the values and practices of EDIA to children, even as young as pre-K, to really start there. And, I think that the logical question, of course, is how do we do that? But I love our arts education colleagues, and I know that this is part of the work that they've been doing. And so this is formalizing this perhaps in a more strategic way, so that as we look at the trajectory of young people going through their educational cycle, there's an awareness that's even deeper, because our culture does not necessarily advocate celebrating people of color equally, or people with sexual preferences differently, or even women differently. So where does it really begin? It begins very, very early in the life of a person. And so let's think about that as well. How can we build this kind of structure? So, action steps that I think that we are looking at, and what we can deepen our work in. Accountability. So who do you have to speak to this about? Who are you making sure knows that this work is being done consistently and in a sustained practice? Is it from the executive leadership? Is it from your manager? Is it from your board of directors? Whomever you decide, accountability is imperative. And where I see success in EDIA, the accountability has been clearly established. So that's very important. That's number one. Then human revolution. Human revolution is a phrase that was coined by Makaguchi and Toda and Daisaku Ikeda, three Japanese philosophers that really looked at this process of human transformation. And as I mentioned earlier, EDIA was not about taking a pill. It's not about writing a memo. And it's not about just taking a seminar. It's personal. And it is looking at your own life to see what role do I play in preventing EDIA, and how can I be a change maker? And human revolution is what will allow us to do that. Meaning, revolution is about change. And as a human being, I'm committing to doing the work and to be a change maker. And then think about, what am I going to do about racism and white fragility? How do I talk about that? How do I look at my behavior? Again, these are things that I'm seeing in arts organizations that are really committed, that have made this at the forefront of their work. These are conversations, brave conversations that they're having, on a rather consistent basis. I teach a class on equity, diversity, and inclusion for the arts, and my students are required to write a paper on, how they would see this unfold. And many of them are working in our institutions now, so they're able to apply their thinking, or they've already started it, and this course has enabled them to go deeper. And so again, as I say, we talk about the state of where we are, I am encouraged. What has enabled you to be a full, educated, professional adult and not know what to do about racism? How have you managed not to know when the information is all around you? What people of color have been saying for years. And white people have to figure this out. What can you do? So consider racism a matter of life and death. And in many instances, as you know, it is. And so you have to do your homework. You have to do the work. So part of the work, and this, as you know, these workshops are happening on a rather consistent level. Implicit and structural bias training. There are these workshops that are happening regularly. I would say the success of these workshops is that they don't happen in isolation, but they are part of a trajectory of training that includes workshops, readings, dialogue, film. It's just like going to school. It's a curriculum. External training on racial equity. Internal facilitated discussion, which can be moderated by anyone. This is where you get to empower the staff. Comprehensive orientation programs for new hires. The onboarding should talk about this at the very beginning. I had a client who has decided to do a lot of EDIA training, but then did not say that to a new hire. And once the new hire heard about that, decided, I'm not really interested in that at this point in my career. So this has to be part of the onboarding, very clearly and boldly stated, and included in your staff policies and procedures. So everyone knows this is the DNA of our organization. This is how you build the culture. And then, of course, how do we measure success and to whom? What does success look like? So working together, we want to affirm a person's perspective before I share mine. These are different behaviors that we want to bring to these conversations. Give yourself time to respond, you know, and you may need to take a moment to say, well, let me think about that, and I'll come back and talk to you later. Or do your best to share your thoughts and feelings as calmly and concisely as possible. So making ourselves heard, and certainly as a person of color, you know, it's not so difficult to be angry. But I know that when you speak from a place of anger, it's very difficult to be heard. And so the muscle is learning how to communicate exactly what we feel, but in a respectful way. And decide that can't change anyone. Back to the concept of human revolution. We change ourselves. So let go of changing the other person. Change me, so that my life is a mirror of my environment. When I change myself, my environment is a direct reflection of that. In the end, your actions are driven by your need for integrity, not a need to correct or change someone else. Integrity, meaning the heart of this. You know, that ultimately we're talking about how do we protect, advance, preserve the arts so they always move forward, that the narrative is always one that is equitable, where the voices of the community were well represented, well told. And at the same time, not to seek reassurance from another person of color when you receive feedback that you feel is unfair. And so taking this personal to say, oh, that's not what I meant. Oh, this is inappropriate, this is disrespectful. But knowing that this is kind of, you know, not a way of bringing unity together. But in fact, when you go to somebody to say, yeah, that was wrong, right? What they said was wrong. That functions a kind of divide and conquer wedge, accomplishing absolutely nothing. And so I think, you know, just in conclusion, you know, what's important for us is to really be optimistic. I think it's important that we look at our platforms, whatever we have, as champions of the arts, and that we want to continue to touch the lives of others, and that means others in the EDIA sense. That optimism is rebellious and daring and vital, and that art calls to the optimism within us and beckons us to breathe. These are things that we can absolutely make happen. And so finally, we want to decide that power and authority can be quite capably led in the hands of diverse individuals, and we will truly see EDIA lifting the arts when we decide that power and authority can be capably led in the hands of diverse individuals. And that if you, as an organization, have not been involved in EDIA work yet in any significant way, now is the time. I'd like to finish with a quote from Daisy O'Gara Dominguez, and I love what she says, that there are no shortcuts. There are no shortcuts, no silver bullets for enabling inclusive workplaces. You can send a powerful message as an ally in a position of power and influence when you're the one who takes up the work. So that is what we are all going to do. So I thank you so much. And now I believe we're going to hear a few questions. Thank you.
Okay, Donna, bravo, brava. And so now is the time to type in those questions and send them on over, and away we go. Okay, so I work for a children's theater, and our equity team is struggling to find ways to connect with those in the community who do not have access to a computer or internet. We are hoping to find ways to reach out to people to ask what they need and how we can provide programs that fit those needs. Do you know if there are any organizations that are finding creative solutions to connect with people during this time?
Yes. Actually, I can think of two examples. One of them is New Jersey Performing Arts Center, where I've worked now for close to 8 years. And we realized that as well, particularly in Newark, that a significant number of our children in our arts ed programs and certainly in the city did not have access to digital resources. And so we're partnering with WNET, New Jersey TV station, to be able to transfer some of our programming, our arts education program, on TV, because we've learned that most households have at least one TV. So that may be an opportunity to look at your local television stations to see if they can include some of your programming. The second example is with the Harlem Arts Alliance, which I'm a board member. And we've also realized in Harlem that there are many families that don't have access to these resources. And we put out a call for iPads and laptops from the Harlem-based community, and it's been overwhelming with the response. We have people giving us laptops, iPads every single day that we then distribute to various families. So those are two examples that I can respond to.
Okay. Do you think that a white woman can do this work?
Absolutely. You know, sorry, didn't mean to be so vehement about it, but yes, you know, Robin DiAngelo is a white woman. And that is one of the reasons her book has such gravitas, is because she is writing from that perspective. Anyone can do this. You know, the first thing is not to apologize for being a white woman. That's great. You know, my daughter is biracial. She's 3/4 white. So yes, that's wonderful. But the point is to not allow that to be a defense or an excuse, but to use that to motivate your life to be a change maker. So now's your opportunity to really see, how can I make a difference? You know, as a white woman, absolutely, you go for it. Soar, S-O-A-R, fly.
What should a white person do if they have received feedback that they think is inappropriate, or if they think they were misunderstood?
So you have two things you can do. And Robbins writes about this in her book. She said the first thing is after you've reflected on it, not the emotional response that touches on your white fragility, but actually reflected on whether or not this statement was true, then perhaps you could seek out a person of color, if that's who made the statement, another person of color that you feel you can trust, and talk to them about it and say, okay, this is what I did. This is what the person said. You know, is this really accurate? You know, is this the truth? You know, how should I think about this? So having that kind of honest conversation with another colleague, you know, that you feel you can have that open, honest dialogue. And then the other point, of course, is to really think about this yourself, you know, and really try to pull away from the emotional response, which is very difficult, you know, when a person is, you feel your character is being attacked, you know, but nothing happens in a vacuum. And I'm of the firm belief that whatever happens in my life is a direct reflection of behavior that I have exhibited or causes that I have made. And so one, take full responsibility that I am going to be the one to really examine this through the lens of equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility. And that, yes, it will be uncomfortable. Whether or not it's appropriate, that's a different word to use. Uncomfortableness, I think that may be more what you're feeling. Of course, I don't know the details of the situation, but I think absolutely you want to take action on it and not just sit with it, because then it just builds, and that then develops into another kind of antagonistic relationship. So please take action on that.
We are looking at our policies and procedures right now. What is the best way to know we are including EDIA parameters properly?
There are some excellent examples in the arts industry. The Wallace Foundation, their website, the Ford Foundation, superb on their website, and Americans for the Arts. Those are three of my go-tos, absolutely, because they are anchored in research. I find them clear, and they're applicable across platforms, regardless of your arts organization. So this is very much research-based. You know, you have to really look in the field to see, you know, what is the leadership on the national level saying about this work, and where are the case studies, you know, that you can also learn from. So that information is free and available.
Okay. Earlier, you mentioned some examples of people of color who have gained leadership positions in 2019 in arts organizations. Can you rename those, and are there other examples that come to mind?
Yes, I actually wrote a blog about it. If you go to my website, you will see it there. I'm looking back for that page. I have it. So what I was stating was, in 2019, 47 women and men were appointed in first ever responsibilities in the world of visual arts and culture. And the most prominent person that I mentioned was Lonnie Bunch III, who was the founding director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in DC. And he was recently appointed as secretary of the Smithsonian Institution. So that's probably one person that has the most powerful role. But of course we have, you know, just Sandra Jackson Dumont being appointed the head of the Lucas Museum. It's incredible. I mean, that's Star Wars and everything. That's fantastic. And then this article, my blog, also talk about curators, you know, that have been appointed in museums for the very first time, such as Denise Murrell is now at the Met Museum in New York. And that Ashley James is at the Guggenheim in New York, and that, let's see, other areas within Sotheby's, there is appointment of executive director of the Independent Art Fair, that's a person of color. So, you know, there's a number of people, Oregon Shakespeare Festival has, you know, their new artistic director is a woman of color. So yes, there's been some movement, not nearly enough, but I'm encouraged.
Okay. Do you have suggestions for how small organizations, often diverse-led, can engage large organizations, often white-led, within a community to recognize all that we are going to be a part of in the recovery process?
Can you read the first part again? I want to make sure I understand. Small.
Okay. Do you have suggestions for how small organizations, which are often diverse-led, is how this person wrote it, can engage large organizations, often white-led, within a community to recognize all are going to be a part of the recovery process?
Yes. So this is where the idea of partnerships and collaboration become really valuable and important. And so I think we have to change the narrative. And you refer to the small organization, often diverse-led. That almost had a connotation that something was a little wrong with that. We have to lead with our strength. And we need to stop apologizing for being a person of color or a person that has anything different from what may be what's considered the mainstream. So that's the first step. Second step is to remove the language such as underserved or under anything under or minority, because it suggests less than. So that when you're looking at a larger white-led organization, you're handing them the tools to be the saving godfather. So we're going to save you all. We're going to just help you make sure that you still exist, as opposed to saying, we We may be a small organization, but we have tremendous resources and values. We have cultivated our art form to the highest level, and we believe this will be an asset to what your programming looks like. Change the narrative. That's step number one. I want you to feel empowered no matter who you are, where you are. You lead with the arts. We're warriors for the arts, so we don't have to apologize for anything. And then talk to these larger organizations about specifically what you bring. So you have to do your research. You can't be everything to them. So where do you see you can fit? I have based my entire career on filling in what's missing. So look and see what's missing in these institutions that you want to be a part of the post-COVID relief. What do you bring that they may not have, or that you can enhance what they have? And it may be your community, and you may be the way in to say, we have access to the very people that you want to contact. And so working together, we may be able to provide some opportunities for you. Whatever you have, it's rich and it has deep value, and I want you to own that.
Last year at my state museum conference, they had a closing panel about the importance of educators. I thought it was interesting because educators are paid the lowest salaries and are often part-time. But when the pandemic occurred, the educators were the first to be let go. Why is there this disconnect?
Well, I can only respond to that philosophically. I don't work in that field, and I would presume you're talking about, you know, pre-K through high school, not college. I'm just going to make that assumption. And I think, first of all, you're absolutely correct. My daughter's in high school, so I am very tuned in to educators and what they're doing, and I bow to them. I have such tremendous respect for the battle they have every day in the classroom, you know, battling with so many different challenges to focus our kids so that they can be capable leaders for the future. So that's absolute. I think that first to let go is because of the culture of our society and what we value. Everything gets back to values at the end of the day. So do we really value our teachers and educators? And which educators are we talking about? Public schools? Were they private schools? Did they get special compensation? You know, so what are we really speaking about? It goes right back to EDIA. And so this is, again, looking at the equity, diversity, and I would venture to say the majority of these educators are certainly of color or are teaching in of color communities. And so the value, certainly not as high as is in a private school and more, you know, more wealthy neighborhood or community. Well, those are things that we have to fight for.
How do you balance representing two separate minority communities?
I think that would be balance representing, let's just say, Indian and Latino. I think that's a question. So I don't think that I don't balance anything in my life. I believe in being 100% wherever I am, 100% footprint where I am. And so that means that it's not going to be 50-50. It's going to be 100% when I'm working with my Latino, 100% when I'm working with my Indian. And they both get that. So how do you do that? It's a muscle. And it is how you think about your work. Because to me, the balance thing gets a little dangerous. And it's going to end up 60-40, 70-30, 89. Is the next thing you know, none. And so commit. You commit. I am going to do my best to bring the resources that I have and know to help this particular project, to enable this particular project to fly. And then we say the same thing to the next target demographic. How do you make this happen? Surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, number one. Surround yourself with people who can inform you as to how to make this work happen. Number two. Number three, surround yourself with people who will help you to do this. And that can be volunteers. That can be advisors. I have never had anyone say no to me from various communities, and this is around the world, when I'm asking them to help me advocate for their community. And so it's in the ask, but it's also knowing that because you ask, it's already a yes. So there's a confidence that we bring as well. And so that would be my response. No balance, 100%, do both.
Donna, I'm sure you balance your checkbook, right? You got to do that. Everybody does that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Both times. Both times.
All right.
Mhm.
Here's another
Okay.
question. Have you found a master question to put to every potential decision made within an institution if EDIA work is truly part of the bloodstream of an organization?
That's the question. Whoever wrote that, that's a beautiful question. How is EDIA a part of the bloodstream of our organization? I don't know if there's any one particular question because this is so multifaceted and it touches in so many different ways. I use the three areas that I started off my presentation with, with staff and pipeline. So important for staff members to know how they can advance. I think it's important, the programming, that is representative of the communities we serve, as well as, programming, staffing, and the other point that I made. I forgot what that was. Pipeline, leadership, yeah. Pipeline, leadership, audiences, of course. And so I still think that those are the three areas that you always want to distinguish and make sure that that same question that was asked, that is addressed in those three areas. That's what I would say. I don't know if there's any one statement that could stand alone. I haven't thought of that yet.
All right.
Thank you for the challenge. I'll keep thinking.
Price has and continues to be a barrier for people of color to actively, fully participate in a number of arts programs. In the post-COVID-19 world, what steps should arts leaders take to look to improve access?
So this goes back to what I was mentioning before about community engagement, and I think that will be a very direct path that will allow many of these organizations to resume business. And so that means that we look at what events don't cost dollars in order to come and participate, but that will create a feeling of safety. And that it's okay to come back. There's all these different articles now about the 10 steps to come back, the 8 steps people will need to come back. Each one of them is writing about events that embrace people where they are, where they get to just literally put one toe into the water to check the temperature. And I think that's how many of us are going to come back. So in this post-COVID world, access becomes even more important. So you have to broaden the net. And so, of course, we never, ever lose our stakeholders, our donors and patrons who've been with us throughout the journey of the life of your organization. You praise them, you cherish them, you hold them tight. What we're talking about with access is there's room for more at the table. Pull in some more chairs. We got room for you over there, Joe and Mary, and yeah, you all come too. Yep, you all can come too. That's what we're talking about when we say creating access. We don't lose anything. It expands. And so I think that looking at price as a barrier, perhaps some of the first events you do may be low price or no price, just to stimulate movement, stimulate interest and access. And then, of course, we have to restore back to where you were in terms of your pricing so that the organization continue to function. But what I've learned about price over the 40 years I've been in this business with people of color, at the end of the day, is what we value. It is not the price of the ticket. I will stand on this until there's no breath left in my body. And I know many people will say, that's not true, that's wrong. I don't believe that. And I say this for so many reasons, which would be a whole nother webinar. But I'll say this, people will pay for what they value. So the very ones that are saying the ticket price is too expensive, just let your eyes go down to what's on their feet. More often than not, it's designer sneakers. Those start at about 150, 170. I have a teenager, I know.
All right.
Look at what, yeah, so.
I think we're at the end of our hour, Donna. Do you want to take one or two more questions? I know you need to get going.
I could take one more.
Okay. And so if we haven't gotten to your question, and there's a lot that we haven't gotten to, you can always email Donna. There she is right there. That's her email address. We will be recording, well, we have been recording this webinar, and we will distribute the webinar to everyone who's on today. So look for your recording in your inbox. Okay, last question. I am a white manager and I have a woman of color who works with me. I know she experiences casual discrimination from visitors, but I've never been present to witness it, nor does she come to me to complain. I want to help, but I'm not sure what to do or if I should even get involved since she has not asked for my assistance, and I don't want to insert myself into a situation in a way that will make her more uncomfortable. Do you have any recommendations on how I can make her space more safe without being overbearing?
Oh, wow. I would love to give you a hug, whoever that person is. Thank you for your compassion. That is so honorable and admirable. Thank you. I would suggest approaching this from an institutional framework so it may not feel so personal, and you may just share with her, you know, I've been attending these EDIA workshops, and I believe here at our organization, this is a direction that we're going to move forward in very quickly. And I would look forward to your participation. And in any way that you can inform the direction we should go into or things we should be sensitive to, this would be great to have your input. And that way, you've kind of made it safe, you made it general, but you let her know there's a place for you to share perhaps what you've been experiencing and feeling.
Super, Donna. I think that's a great note to end on, and certainly appreciate all your hard work and preparation and knowledge and experience. I'm sure everyone agrees with me that this has been a wonderfully educational and illuminating hour. So, Donna, I'll see you again, and we'll see everyone again soon. Until then.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. All right.